Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Our guest today is Nicolas Burtey. He's the CEO of Galoy Money. They're getting banks to adopt Bitcoin. He's based in El Salvador. He's originally from Europe. He made the move. Welcome, Nicolas to the podcast. Bienvenue.
Merci. Thanks for having me.
De rien. Thanks for being here. I got the Quebec accent. I'm sipping some vin rouge. I'm in Europe right now, so the roles are reversed. Yeah, man. Are you in El Salvador right now?
Yes, I'm currently in El Salvador. Yeah.
Nice. And are you friends with
capital city?
We have in San Salvador.
Yeah.
We have one Frenchie in El Salvador. Good friend of the podcast, Quentin. How do you pronounce his last name? Ehrlich. Oh man, something. You know Quentin in Berlin?
I think he's working for Mi Primer Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, Quentin from Mi Primer Bitcoin. I
know him. Yes. There is not too much for whatever reason. There is not too much French people here in El Salvador, I think.
Quentin Ehrenmann.
Yes.
So I want to hear about Galoy and everything that you guys are doing in terms of crypto adoption in Latin America. Maybe we could start with that, just a high-level overview of what you're working on. And then I want to go in a bit of the backstory about how you made the move from Europe to the US to El Salvador, because I think there are a lot of people in a similar position who see the opportunity and are thinking about making the move, but maybe they're a bit scared to do so. For whatever reason. But tell me like a little bit more about Galoy and what you're building here.
Yeah, in short, Galoy is a software company building software so that banks can use Bitcoin. The current product we're focusing on is called Lana. It's a product that helps banks offer a Bitcoin-backed lending product. The idea is that if you have Bitcoin and you bought it like a couple of years ago, now the value have increased on it quite a bit, and now you say, okay, maybe I don't want to sell it. In many countries, if you sell it, you will have to pay some capital gain tax on it. So selling it is maybe not ideal, but you could say maybe I could use it as a collateral to get a loan.
Borrow against the Bitcoin.
Exactly. So this is the type of software we are developing. We're not addressing the end user. We are addressing bank and financial institutions with our software. The idea that banks eventually, it's something we can also talk into because there's a lot of changes on this, but we think eventually banks will want to adopt Bitcoin, use Bitcoin, and they will need a software company like us to provide the software for them to have a lending product, for instance, using Bitcoin. So this is what we are focusing on at the moment. But Galoy, as a company, I founded it in 2019. And when I started the company, I really wanted to develop, at the time, I really wanted to work on the Lightning Network, which is this layer 2 on top of Bitcoin that allow instant transaction over Bitcoin. And I was living in California, but I found that there won't be as much innovation for the medium of exchange piece in Bitcoin in the US for many reasons, but in the US, banking works overall fairly well. Most people have a bank account. So there is not a ton of friction to make payment in the US. But if you come down to Latin America, then you can see there is more friction, certainly. And El Salvador, at the time, had 70% of the population unbanked. There was also a lot of money flowing from the US to El Salvador in the form of remittance. And Bitcoin at the time was not regulated. So I decided to develop the wallet in El Salvador 5 years ago, initially called the Bitcoin Beach wallet. And this helped people in El Salvador use Bitcoin. So this is how also I guess, dipped my toe into El Salvador a couple of years ago. Eventually, we sold this business, the wallet. The wallet grew. We renamed it to Blink. Maybe some people in the audience might have heard about it. It's really used in Latin America for people who want to spend their Bitcoin. A lot of Bitcoin circular economy are using it.
Mm-hmm.
It's heavily used in Roatan, for instance, in Honduras, also in Peru. So it's this wallet, Bitcoin Beach wallet, also known as Blink, is good to spend your Bitcoin. So, but us, Galoy, as a company, we decided to really focus on serving the bank. So we sold this business last year, and now we're focused on onboarding bank, and we're working with an upcoming bank in El Salvador that will be offering Bitcoin back lending product. And we're also in discussion with many banks in the US to help them adopt Bitcoin.
Okay. So it sounds like your first product was sort of consumer facing. The new product, Galoy, the new company, is for enterprise.
Is B2B, yeah. And why is that? Because 5 years ago, the idea of having bank adopting Bitcoin was completely utopian, let's say. And so I realized at the time that, look, if I want to understand this ecosystem, develop some abilities, ramp up on the technical side, you need to, if there is no one willing to adopt your tech, you need to create your own customer. And so this is why we create our own wallet, to be able to, I guess, iterate on the technology. But you're completely right. Now our focus is B2B, right? It's really helping the bank adopt Bitcoin.
And what's what banks is it? Is it the local banks in El Salvador or in Latin America, or what banks are you going after?
So in El Salvador, it's a new bank. It depends. In the US, the law is changing rapidly for banks as regard to crypto. There is something from the SEC called SAB 121. It's like a built-in, a sort of a rule that was preventing banks to use Bitcoin. And this rules was reverted like 2 weeks ago. And so now there is a lot of opportunity we think, in the US, because now the door for banks to adopt Bitcoin is like completely opening. But the prior administration in the US was like definitively anti-Bitcoin, anti-crypto. Mm-hmm. The new administration is doing like 180 degrees, and now allowing banks to use and adopt Bitcoin. So we'll see how fast banks in the US may adopt Bitcoin, but we think it's going to change dramatically and quickly. One interesting thing is, so El Salvador has adopting Bitcoin as legal tender in 2021, so like 4 years ago. And there was an expectation maybe that bank in El Salvador should adopt Bitcoin, right? Because now Bitcoin is legal tender. So obviously the bank here, like Banco Agricola, Banco Atlantida, Banco Cuscatlan, like all the major banks, mm-hmm. should adopt Bitcoin because Bitcoin is legal tender here. Mm-hmm. The reality is that no bank in El Salvador have touched Bitcoin. And can you guess why?
Why no traditional sort of bank with branches has adopted Bitcoin? And when you say adopted Bitcoin, is that well, I guess there's a couple different ways they could adopt it, right? Like they could adopt it at a sort of retail level by, maybe buying and selling Bitcoin with retail and having, I don't know, Bitcoin ATMs and stuff, or at the more institutional level, right, where maybe they're creating Bitcoin financial products or doing institutional things. Are you seeing it adoption from either sort of side?
Yeah, and basically there hasn't been any form of adoption, really. And the reason is that even though Bitcoin may have been legal tender in El Salvador, banks in El Salvador are using the US dollar. So US dollar is a official currency, I guess, beyond Bitcoin in El Salvador, and US dollar is a mostly used currency. And a bank in El Salvador, they're not operating in isolation. At the end of the day, the bank here have what's called a corresponding bank in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically how they move money internationally, right? So like, it's almost like a layer 2 on top of the US dollar, for people in crypto space, maybe it will speak to them. So the bank in El Salvador, there is a sort of a clearing system here, but at the end of the day, all the dollar held in the bank here are really held somewhere in a bank in New York.
Right.
And so if the bank is in New York, because the regulation in the US said, no, you can't touch Bitcoin, the regulator in the US didn't want US bank to touch Bitcoin. Of course, the bank in El Salvador, who have a bank account in the bank in the US, could not touch Bitcoin either. And so the fact that the bank in the US will now be able to hold Bitcoin, transact in Bitcoin, borrow against your Bitcoin, it will also have repercussion in like most countries around the world that have banks with corresponding bank in the US. And so I think there will be a drastic change in banking as it pertains to Bitcoin in the upcoming few months and years.
So basically, as the US banks start working with Bitcoin, which it seems like they are kind of post election, they have a bit more permission to do so. That will allow the El Salvadoran banks to start adopting it.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Or at least, let's say there was previously a legal barrier that, or I don't know if it's legal, but a contractual agreement from their US correspondent that
Right.
will not allow them to use Bitcoin, and now they will be able to use Bitcoin. So I think not only we will see in the upcoming years a lot of US bank adopting Bitcoin, we'll also see a lot of bank around the world adopting Bitcoin. And those banks, it's not that they didn't want to adopt Bitcoin in the past, it's just that they couldn't.
Right. Definitely makes sense. Yeah, and if anyone wants to understand the analogy better, it's like any there's a lot of these digital banks now, right? Where you maybe have Relay or Novo or TransferWise or any number of these digital banks in the US. And what they really are is sort of like a software layer sitting on top of a traditional bank, like a BNY Mellon or a Chase or a Wells Fargo or something like that. And I guess it's the same situation with the El Salvador banks, where because they use the US dollar, they have a corresponding bank, as it's called, back in the U.S. And it's like kind of weird. Maybe it's not the perfect analogy, but it's almost like the El Salvadoran bank is just like a software layer, quote unquote, and then also sort of like physical branches that relates back to the U.S. bank. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think 100%. Yeah. Basically, every rule and regulation that is present in the US, Salvadorian bank, have to,
Mm-hmm.
abide by those rules. Really.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltza, author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now. And so how are you approaching this? Like, are you just going straight to the US and straight to the corresponding bank, or are you actually going to the local El Salvador banks or the Latin American banks? And what are you finding is working for sort of infiltrating, and what's like the best first product? Because there's obviously dozens of ways you could probably implement crypto and Bitcoin within these financial institutions, but there's probably like a low hanging fruit, right?
Yeah, I mean the sales cycle with bank is very long. Like it's not something you do in a month or two. Like it typically takes 6 to 12 months to get a bank, or even longer to get a bank to adopt any new technology, any new software. So it takes time. Currently, as a company, we have people in generally Latin America and the North America. So we currently El Salvador and the US are two countries we are particularly focusing on. But yeah, if we see opportunity in other Latin America countries, we will obviously work on those. And the product, your question about the product, what product do we want to put into the market? The Bitcoin backed lending product is really what we think there is a lot of demand for today. So we're helping banks to loan against your Bitcoin is for us one of the key strategic area we are investing into.
And this is where an individual has Bitcoin, and then the banks are going to lend against my Bitcoin, right?
Exactly, yeah. And if you think about it, there should be a lot more in my mind. There should be a lot more product in the market for that, because if let's say I have one Bitcoin, it's worth like 100K, and I want to borrow 50K from it. Like for the bank, there is really no risk to give this 50K to this individual or this company, because they have the collateral. And so if at any point in time the person doesn't repay the loan, or if the price of the collateral go down, contractually, typically the bank would be able to sell the collateral, and Bitcoin is liquid, it trades 24/7. So
yeah, it's
they
like
could
the most
liquidate the collateral.
it's the easiest thing to seize, right? As long as they have the seed phrase, like it's a lot easier and faster to seize a Bitcoin than it is to seize somebody's house, let's say.
Yeah. If you compare to the mortgage, like the process to sell a house, the house could be in a bad shape, and because maybe the
Right, it's a lot
borrower,
harder to sell a house and get liquidity from that for a bank than it is to sell the Bitcoin and get liquidity from that.
Especially if you have a situation like in the market in 2008, right? Like where suddenly the price of the market for house go up like 50%, like in a matter of I don't know, 6 months. Like you can't just sell all your assets. But for Bitcoin, like you can sell it anywhere. And so if you really think about it, every bank should.
One second, I'm gonna turn the light on over here. I know you can't even see me anymore. Sorry, I'll be back. Hopefully, I can cut this from the audio. Sorry, and we're back. So I guess what I'd be curious about is what is the mechanics of this actually work? Like, how does the what do you call it? Like the possession of the Bitcoin change when someone defaults on the loan, and like is it the seed phrase that is transferred from one party to another, sort of, or how does that work?
Okay, so let's imagine, I am the bank, you are the borrower, and so you have one Bitcoin, and you want to borrow $50,000 from your Bitcoin. As a bank, typically I will ask that you send me my Bitcoin, and so now the bank will basically hold the Bitcoin as a collateral. And
so do you basically have to you basically have to give the ownership of the Bitcoin when you sign up for the loan?
Yes, typically. And there is some nuance here that we can maybe dive into, but typically you as a borrower, you have to give away the control of your Bitcoin, which doesn't come without risk. So you might want to choose which counterparty you are working with if you want to get your loan, because obviously you don't want your Bitcoin to suddenly disappear, right? Because if you get a 50K loan, but then you lose your Bitcoin, like at the end of the day, you're really not in a better position. But yes, typically the bank will take possession of the Bitcoin for the duration of the loan. After you repay the loan in maybe over the course of a year or 2 years, then the bank will send you back the collateral. Something that is very interesting with Bitcoin is that, unlike maybe, let's say, a gold bar, right, or Apple stock, or any other collateral you can imagine, with Bitcoin you could segregate the custody across multiple parties. So you could say, okay, I am Bank, Nicolas, but maybe I don't trust Bank Nicolas too much. But if Bank Nicolas work with some other party and they do a multi-sig, such that to move the collateral one, multiple organizations need to sign the key from the multi-sig to move the Bitcoin. Now it's a lot more robust solution, right? So we have seen over the past couple of years, probably the one that have innovated in the space is called Unchained in the US. Mm-hmm. And instead of sending me the collateral to myself, you send it to a Bitcoin multisig. And the idea of a multisig is that now, let's say it's a 2 out of 3. Now you need to have 2 signatures to move the Bitcoin. And maybe the 2 out of 3 belong to 3 different entities. So now it's like, even though I give you some fiat for the loan, like moving the collateral require multiple parties to sign. And now it's a lot more robust as a system. So it's a great feature for borrower to be able to spread the custody of your Bitcoin across multiple organizations. And it's something that is very unique to Bitcoin. Like you cannot do that with any other asset. It's because Bitcoin is programmable. So as Bitcoin will adopt Bitcoin, we should also see a lot of different offering, some of them using multisig for the most advanced banks. And I think the people that are deep in the rabbit hole of Bitcoin and understand what counterparty risk will certainly maybe want to pay a premium to use those banking services.
Interesting. And so you're basically like approaching the banks and saying, hey, we'll set up this and we'll be sort of the back end infrastructure for this loan product?
Yeah, I mean, what we're developing is like a lending product as a service, right? It's a platform where we integrate with the bank, with the core banking system, and we have to configure a couple of things like the chart of account and also, what type of loan. Is it like a normal loan? Is it a line of credit? And, is a loan repayable and this type of thing. And but the idea is to make it as plug and play as it can be, so that a bank can adopt this technology very quickly, or much quicker than if they have to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. And so you basically approach these banks and you say, you can white label my software.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I imagine they want to do some very deep due diligence on your technology and, get their tech team in to like make sure your platform's sound and everything.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. The due diligence process is pretty intense. The code that we have is on GitHub, like it's source available, so anyone can have a look at it. As a company, we also like certification like ISO 27001, which is like fairly high standard for IT security. And I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to do if you want to work with banks to show that, you have the right processes, the right security in place so that banks can work with you.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Crema Social. Crema Social is like TikTok for international dating. It's an app you can download right now on your phone, and 3 out of 4 people on Crema are single women. The app was founded in Colombia So, unsurprisingly, there are a lot of Latinas on the app, by the way. So, how does it work? Crema Social is a social meal experience where you invite a hot girl for a lunch date via video call and food delivery. New concept, so you'll have to try it out for yourself, but this is probably the best way to meet Latinas before you visit the country. So if you're in Latin America or planning to visit Latin America, download Crema Social now and start getting dates right away. There will be a link in the description to download, or just search Crema Social on your favorite app store. Have fun, guys. Yeah, definitely. So who's the super genius here, Nicola? Is that you, or you got some geniuses working for you?
I think our team is a genius. I mean, we have a lot of talented engineer on the team. Probably Justin, my CTO, is a person that really helped to have the right architecture. But yeah, all the people on our team, I think, are talented engineers. So yeah, I don't want to take all the credit. I think the team is our team is really really great.
Sure. Are you coding too, or were you a coder in the past?
Yeah, I'm coding. I mean, I'm spending still I don't know, uh, 30 to 50% of my time coding.
That's pretty good. I mean, that's pretty much full time as a coder.
Yeah, that's a full time as a CEO for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, but one way to think about
Coding
it is that
CEO.
it's a very technical product, and I think you need to, as a founder, you need to continue being the code, I guess, to get
Yeah.
a pulse of how the software is built, what type of company you can work with, how much work there will be to add X or Y features. So for me, the idea of following on the tech side is like fairly important. Eventually, if today we're a team of like 12 people, but if we reach, maybe after 20 people, like it might be harder to spend as much time coding, but also now with AI, there is a question on like, do you need to have a team more than 20 ever? Like, I don't know.
So what is the tech stack? Is it in what do they code contract, like Solidity and stuff, or what's the tech stack?
So no, Solidity is
That's Ethereum, right?
yeah, Ethereum based. So we really focus on Bitcoin. Our code is done in Rust, and it's using. I mean, it's mostly like it's centralized, right? Like a bank will own it as a centralized thing.
Hmm.
It's not meant to be decentralized, and but our tech stack is very standard, Rust and SQL, and can pretty run anywhere.
Okay, so mostly Rust. Um, what did you get your start on? Like, what was your? Because Rust is newish. What was your main programming language when you were coming up as a developer?
Oh gosh, I played with C when I was a kid. I don't know, 10 years old ish. My first startup was in the virtual reality space. It was C++ and CUDA. But that was like, I don't know, the startup started in first startup in 2010, so like 15 years ago. Like Galoy is my third startup, so like there's been many iterations for me as an entrepreneur, like many industries also. Um, so yeah, C was probably my first touch point in languages, but that was 30 years ago.
Okay, so you are a coder super genius. I wanted to ask you about Twitter a little bit because clearly, you've done something with Twitter because you personally, the at Nicolas Burtey handle, you have 12,000 followers. The Galoy money has 11,400 followers. The Blink also has 12,000 something followers. Is this just Are they all bots, or how did you build the follower account, and how do you feel like that plays into your strategy?
I'm not managing Blink and Galoy, so you would have to ask Andrew for that. But I don't know. I don't have any particular strategy for Twitter. I don't. I just post things when I, have things to share, and I guess people like the. I don't know, follow me because sometimes I say something intelligent. I guess I don't know,
You're
or
too humble.
maybe I just post some meme and people like my meme. I'm not sure. I mean, certainly I gained quite a bit of follower in 2021 when Bitcoin became legal tender in El Salvador, and we were in El Salvador at the time, right? And
Mm.
so there was only a few people who was aware of what was happening in El Salvador. And so I did a few thread at the time to explain, like, what can it mean that Bitcoin is becoming legal tender here? That was the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. So I
Hmm.
guess a lot of people has been following me at that time. But otherwise, I don't have a Twitter strategy, like really.
So you were already in El Salvador before Bitcoin became legal tender.
Yes, I was basically I developed a wallet in El Salvador 1 year before El Salvador adopting Bitcoin. So um, yes.
So what made you go to El Salvador before Bitcoin became legal tender? Like what drew you there?
Um, so I wanted to build wallet on Bitcoin using Lightning. I understood that I was living in Silicon Valley at the time in California,
Hmm.
and I understood that there would not be much innovation on payments using Bitcoin in the US. So, which is why what drove me to look into what could I do somewhere else. And El Salvador popped into the radar because there was a um, local circular economy here in El Zonte called Bitcoin Beach that was just started, and I understood that the team on the ground here didn't have much technical understanding of what is on chain, what is Lightning, like how to create a local circular economy. And so I say, hey, I can help you make a wallet for your local circular economy, and they say, yeah, sure. And this is how it started.
That's crazy. So, because when you went down there, that was really before it became the safest place in the world. You were quite a pioneer in the sense.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, I would not have adventured myself anywhere at the time. 2020, it was the middle of COVID. I was just going to the town where I was building the wallet, and I didn't adventure myself much. And the reason I really eventually moved here, like about 18 months ago, was because El Salvador became safe, very
Mhm.
safe. I would have not moved here permanently like 5 years ago for sure.
And what did people think at the time when you moved from California to El Salvador before it was so clear that it was going to be like a safe up and coming country? Back in 2020, 2021, these things were not clear.
Yeah, people generally, I mean, it depends, who do you ask, but overall, a lot of people were like, why? Have you not heard that it's a dangerous country? Like it was maybe the most frequent
Mhm.
feedback for sure. But it was also like, dude, it's COVID, why are you traveling? Like,
Right.
what the
That
fuck
too.
are you doing?
That too.
But because of COVID, I mean, it was such. I mean, it was clearly the opposite of now. There was not a lot of people. I mean, no one was traveling. Not only because El Salvador, few people were traveling at the time, but with COVID, like there was really no one traveling.
Mhm.
So that was certainly an interesting time. But actually, retrospectively, I think COVID was the best time to travel. Like you could travel to any place, and have it for you because like everybody was scared about COVID. So
This is true. This is true. And how have you kind of seen things change from 2020 to now in terms of the growth of the Bitcoin community? You must have been one, sort of like one of the early pillars of that community back then.
Yeah, there was some growth, but less than I would have expected. It's I think most Salvadorian, don't earn a lot of money, like they will earn $400, $500 per month. And, when it's hard for you to meet your need, like month over month, at the end of the month, you don't have any money left, basically. Like, you're not necessarily thinking that you should invest in Bitcoin. Like, you just
Hmm.
living day to day. So for that reason, I think Bitcoin have not necessarily been the currency of choice for most Salvadorian. Also, the law was adopted at the end of 2021, which was 1 month for the peak of the life cycle, where Bitcoin was at 60K. The peak was like 65K or 68K, something like that. And so most people who have adopted Bitcoin in El Salvador because of the law lost quite a bit of money the following 2 years. And so I think the timing also didn't help out. Another factor that didn't help out is there was a wallet from the government called Chivo Wallet, and it was a total disaster. So, the wallet didn't work. The transaction was cancelled. You need to call the customer support all the time to, make a transaction. It was really a mess. And so when you combine all this, it certainly, there was a lot of headwind. But given that, I think what the law in El Salvador brought is a lot of Bitcoiner in the country still. And it's if you want to be surrounded by Bitcoiner, I think it's a great place to be. There's a lot of meetup here. So it brought a lot of talent, I think, which is great,
Hmm.
right? Because of course, for El Salvador, it's great because those people are expats. They have a lot more money than the local will have, for an average salary, and so they can spend the money here and help, the economy in general. So overall, this is certainly a large benefit to El Salvador, I think. An interesting point that the Bitcoin legal tender has been reversed about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So Bitcoin is no longer legal tender in El Salvador.
What? It's no longer a legal tender?
No, it's no longer legal tender. Out of end of January this year, I think, or maybe early February.
I
It's
haven't
no
heard
longer
about
legal tender.
this. So they made a legal tender. It was legal tender for 2, 3 years, and now you're saying as of a couple of weeks ago, it's no longer a legal tender. What?
No,
What
it's no longer
happened?
legal tender. So, do you know the IMF?
So we bit of a lag in the connection there. You hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Do you know the IMF?
Yeah, I've heard of the IMF.
So IMF is, let's say, can be difficult with developing country because on one hand they give loans for country, so it's like the bank of country.
Right.
But the loan can be pretty bad
And
at
it comes
times.
with conditions.
Yeah, it's called covenants, and for El Salvador to get a loan, because El Salvador need a loan to repay the debts that they had for a long time, by the debt
Sure.
contracted by a previous president,
Sure.
and they need some billion of dollars to pay the former debt. So they don't really have a choice than to get a loan from the IMF. And IMF uh, allegedly set a condition that El Salvador can only get a loan if they revoke the Bitcoin law. And so, yeah, it was revoked 3 weeks ago.
Wow. So, and wow. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? I haven't heard about this.
About the IMF loan, about
Yeah,
the.
so this is a loan that has been on the books for a number of years, I'm sure.
So it's for El Salvador to get a new loan. So every, it's like you can think of if you get let's say you get a mortgage, you buy a house, you get a mortgage in in many countries, like in the UK, for instance, you will get a mortgage for 5 years.
Hmm.
And then after 5 years, you need to renew your mortgage, right? And maybe you will have a different interest rate. But like every 5 years, you need this new loan to pay back your old
Hmm.
loan. And this is the same for a country. Like a country that want to develop some infrastructure will get a loan. I mean, it will be a much bigger loan than mortgage, but it's a $1 billion loan, and the money will be used to develop the infrastructure. Now the challenge is at the end of the loan, it's typically a country will take a new loan to pay back the older debt,
Right.
and this is what is happening here. And I don't have the detail about all the loans that need to be repaid and when, but this is a general framework. And so there is a loan here of $1.3 billion that El Salvador is getting.
Yeah.
But to get this loan, the IMF made a condition that Bitcoin should no longer be legal tender here, because the IMF says that Bitcoin creates a systemic risk for the country, and therefore, it will be a higher risk for the loan, if the
That's so
country continue
crazy.
to use Bitcoin
I
as
didn't
legal
know
tender.
about this. I didn't know about this. So yeah, I'm looking at a couple articles right now. So Bitcoin is no longer considered a currency, quote unquote, though it remains legal tender, quote unquote. Bitcoin is now entirely voluntary. Previously, the law mandated that businesses accept Bitcoin for any goods or services. Additionally, the government has stepped back from its involvement in Shivo Wallet, the state backed digital wallet. The reforms come as part of a broader financial agreement between Bukele and the IMF. One of the conditions for a proposed $1.4 billion extended fund facility loan. Okay, learned something new here today. I guess, I mean, this came out a couple weeks ago, but you're closer to it than I am.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big deal because the first country who are adopting Bitcoin as legal tender is no longer having Bitcoin as legal tender. So that's a precedent for sure. And I think that's a bad precedent. But at the same time, I'm also, if I were in the shoes of Bukele, and you need the money for the country, like I think you may not have a choice. I think I'm not sure, but I would guess.
Hmm. Incredible. And so, how do you feel like this would affect your business? Is this having a bit of a chilling effect?
Not really. For me, I think over the last, I mean, at the same time, the SAB 121 in the US, this rule that was preventing banks to use Bitcoin, is a much bigger thing in my mind, because now it's opening the door for Bitcoin for bank in the US to adopt Bitcoin, but also across the world because of this network of corresponding banks. So um, for me, overall, what's happening in the last 2 months is very, very positive for the business, not negative.
Hmm.
But if I think about specifically this pullback from Bitcoin as a dollar, I think that's not great from the perspective of Bitcoin as a currency.
Hmm.
Bitcoin as medium of exchange, because it means there will be less Bitcoin transacting around just for buying goods and services. The government of El Salvador continue to buy Bitcoin for its own treasury. So I think the government now has like 6,000 Bitcoin or something like that, which is great. I mean, of course, the price of Bitcoin going up, the government of El Salvador will have more money eventually to repay this loan, and maybe they can, eventually we have Bitcoin as gold standard. But I think that's not great for Bitcoin as a medium of exchange for sure. And a lot of people will say that, look, even though Bitcoin was mandatory, like every business has to accept Bitcoin, like that was part of the first law in 2021. On one hand, this law was never enforced, so no business was fined because they were not accepting Bitcoin. You could have guessed maybe 3-4 years ago that, hey, if you're a business and you don't accept Bitcoin, like the government will come to see you and say, look, you're going to get a fine unless you accept Bitcoin. The reality is that the government never tried to enforce this rule, right? So you may say, okay, maybe that's a no. It doesn't change much at the end of the day, right? Because even though it was mandatory, the never enforced. So does it matter? And the reality, it matters a little bit because all the international business that are in El Salvador, you can think of the McDonald's, Starbucks, or Walmart, or Costco, have been accepting Bitcoin. And so it made it very easy as a Bitcoiner to spend your Bitcoin here, which is great. I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm here is because I can spend my Bitcoin very easily. I don't need necessarily to use a credit card.
Sure.
But those businesses, the reason they are adopting Bitcoin is because the law, mandates them to adopt Bitcoin. And now we're going to see, but will those businesses continue to accept Bitcoin or not? I don't know. Like we'll figure it out. I mean, the law was changed only some weeks ago, so for now it hasn't changed materially. But I expect that there will be a general pullback in the number of places you can spend your Bitcoin the upcoming year, which is not great.
Well, I think El Salvador is still adding to their own strategic reserve, even with this particular change.
Yeah, they are adding, and this is the difference between Bitcoin as a medium of exchange and Bitcoin as a store of value. So this definitively reinforces that Bitcoin is a store of value. El Salvador, the government of El Salvador is buying for their own reserve, but if you cannot spend it as a resident, as a citizen, like if you cannot spend your Bitcoin, like how useful Bitcoin may be, right, as a currency. So which is a nuance between Bitcoin, as medium of exchange and Bitcoin as store of value.
Cool. Well, I know we're running low on time. Where can people learn more about the project, learn more about Galoy, what you're doing, and get involved, get in touch with you?
Yeah, Twitter, I guess, Nicolas Burtey. I'm sure it will be in the show notes. And Galoy Money is a Twitter account for Galoy, or galoy.io for our website.
Awesome, man. And any final message or anything that you want to share with the audience?
Anyone listening to this podcast, I guess, that is curious about living on a Bitcoin standard, using Bitcoin, should definitively consider, I think, coming to El Salvador, visit the country. It's a beautiful country. I think that's my message.
It's epic. And when you tell people that you were one of the founders of the Blink wallet, are people impressed?
I guess. I mean, because of this here, a lot of people will know me, right? They will know that I created this project. So generally they're happy to meet me.
Sorry, we just did a podcast with Ronnie from the Bitcoin hardware store, based in Bitcoin Beach, Zonte. So people should check out that episode as well. We've done a lot of different podcasts with different Bitcoiners in El Salvador. Check out the Quinton episode as well, the El Salvador Roundtable. But yeah, for the audience, this has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe to the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Helps us grow the show. We put out 2 episodes a week with amazing guests like Nicolas, and you won't want to miss an episode. Ciao for now.